Hello everyone and welcome to the August edition of A1 Momentum webinar series. We are delighted to welcome Jenni Coulter, physiotherapist at Craighalbert Centre, as our guest presenter today. So for those of you who might not be familiar with Craighalbert Centre, this is a specialist therapy and education centre supporting children and young people with cerebral palsy and other neurological conditions. The centre brings together a multidisciplinary team approach, so including physiotherapists, occupational therapists, speech and language therapists and teachers, and other specialist practitioners working with children and young people to develop their abilities and potential. And Jenni brings many years of experience as a paediatric physiotherapist and has a particular interest and expertise in postural care. She is part of the Scottish Postural Care Forum and supported the development of the National Postural Care Strategy and helping to put its ambitions into practice. So today, Jenni will be sharing her expertise on some of the important recent developments in postural care assessments, including some guidance to support effective assessments and how clinicians can help protect body shape through appropriate assessments and intervention for both children and as they grow into adulthood as well. She'll also explore how that can be embedded into your practice. So it's a really relevant topic for anyone working within health and social care. And as this session is being recorded, we're unable to take questions at the end. However, we'd really welcome your questions. So please do send them on to us by email and we'll collate those and forward to Jenni at a later stage. So without any further ado, I'm delighted to hand over to Jenni. Thank you, Jenni, for joining us, and over to you.
Thank you very much, Norma, for that introduction. So yeah, hopefully I can share some of what Norma was saying there. So I'll just start with looking at a wee bit of who I am, although Norma's done a lovely introduction for me. But yeah, I'm a paediatric physiotherapist. I work at the Craighalbert Centre. So we work from birth to 19 years and all sorts of different neurological conditions. And our aim is really to reduce the barriers and enable more participation. We work really closely together as a team, both with the families and the children that we work with, as well as with our education colleagues, OTs, speech and language therapists, nurses, as well as working with the NHS staff that are also involved with the children that we care for. And we also work to support national improvement as well. And then part of what I do is also work with the Scottish Postural Care Forum, and that's brought together so many different people. So that's brought together PAMIS, which, if you don't know PAMIS, that's promoting a more inclusive society. They're a charity and they do a lot of support for families and carers. We also have family carers on the Scottish Postural Care Forum, which is a really important part, and they give us unique insights that the rest of us don't have. And then we've got as broad a range as we can have, or we're trying to have as broad a range as we can have across the Scottish Postural Care Forum. So we're covering paediatrics, but we're also covering adults. We've got physios, we've got OTs, we've got wheelchair services, we've got a doctor, we've got representation from government, although it's always good to have more of that. And then we've also got spread across NHS, local authority and third sector. We cover as much of Scotland as we can, people from different areas of Scotland. And then we also work with NES, which is the NHS Education for Scotland. So it's quite a broad range. And our purpose was to develop the national strategy and then to implement it. So that's what we do. So a little bit about what postural care is. So good posture is the body position which allows you to function to the best of your abilities, and that's without causing strain or long-term damage to your body. So when we're thinking about postural care, that's then thinking about the support that needs to be given for those with movement difficulties to function to the best of their abilities, and that's while preserving and improving the body's symmetry and function, and thereby preventing long-term damage to their bodies. It's quite a complex area. It requires a team approach because there's so many different factors, and we need to be thinking about posture 24/7 and all the different factors that impact on it. But postural care is often thought of as something that is a negative thing or a restrictive thing, but it's much more than that. And hopefully from these kind of explanations of what it is, hopefully that shows that it's really about enabling people to function as best as possible and participate as best as possible. So this slide was initially titled Recent Developments in Postural Care, but what I realised when I was thinking about this was that actually this is more just what I've learned about postural care recently, rather than necessarily what the developments are. But hopefully I'm going to share some things that are helpful for others. So there's a lot of information about postural care that's been known for a while. If you've not heard of the Goldsmith family, I thoroughly recommend looking into them. They're an incredible family that have a lot of expertise on postural care. So John and Liz Goldsmith, and then they've passed that passion and that expertise on to their daughters, Sarah Clayton and Anna Goldsmith. So it's worth looking at a lot of their stuff because they've got a lot of insight into postural care. But I think what's different now is that there's more conversations happening. There's always going to be more research coming out and we need to be keeping up with that. But there's also more conversations happening that's actually changing people's practice and changing people's understanding of postural care. I think what's really important is not just relying on kind of journal articles and things, although they obviously have a really important part to play, but connecting with the right people that are passionate about postural care, as well as connecting with kind of local services to you, because the more you connect with other people that understand this area, that work in this area, the bigger an impact we're going to have together. One of the challenges is consistency across services, and that's come up kind of time and time again, and that's really challenging to improve. But if we work together, I think we can improve that, and the more conversations that we're a part of, the more we can actually make that difference. So that's really important too. One of the things that's really changed in my understanding, and I think is still a challenge for services across the country and across the world, is what we think about postural care in terms of once postures start to change, it can often be thought that they're just going to get worse and worse. And that's been the belief for a while, but actually that's not the case. That's not what the evidence is showing. And there's more and more evidence coming out to show that actually we can change body shape in a positive direction. And we need to start believing that and making sure that we're putting the right things in place to do that, which if we start to understand that and start to do that is a really exciting thing. So we want to be encouraging that. I think one of the other big things that I've learnt that's changed my practice is thinking about how the body is not just different parts, but those parts are all connected and they all impact on each other. And sometimes we have a habit of separating the body, and we assess and treat as if the legs and arms aren't really connected to the pelvis and the trunk. And we need to think more about actually what is causing the body to move. Is it that the leg position is pulling the pelvis and the trunk into a different position? So actually we need to think about how all the different body parts are impacting on each other and not just treat one body part at a time, because that's just going to have a negative impact on another body part. That movement that's being caused is just going to happen elsewhere if we don't think about the link between the different body parts and how they connect together. Along with that, we also need to think about how the body is 3D. It doesn't just move in one direction. It can move side to side. It can move one side up compared to the other side. It can rotate. Because if we don't get that right and we don't understand how the body is moving away from the middle, away from a symmetrical position, then we're not going to get the right forces to bring it back to a symmetrical position. So we need to really be understanding how the body connects together and in what way it's actually moving. I think my practice was often to set up systems where it was just kind of supports at the trunk, supports at the pelvis, supports at the legs, and not actually thinking about, am I putting the right forces in place, but just thinking that having some support was enough, but actually we need the right forces to correct the forces that are acting against that body. So we need to be understanding exactly what those forces are and how they're impacting the body to be able to apply the right force to correct it. There are also multiple factors that impact on postural care. It's not quite as simple as just putting in those postural supports. We wish it was, that would be lovely and easy, but there's a lot more going on with these people because they're people. They're not just kind of robots that we can put in these forces and think that's it all sorted. So we need to be thinking about the bigger picture. And that's when it's really helpful to liaise with our colleagues that might have different expertise from us, because there's so many things that can impact on whether postural support is effective or not. So that can include things like the caring needs for the person, their moving and handling, their bone density, their continence needs. It can include their sensory needs. It can include their respiratory function, their feeding, their vision, and their proprioception, which is their understanding of where their body is in space. And that's not an endless list. There are countless things that can impact on postural care and how effective it is that we need to consider, because if we're getting bits of that wrong, then the whole thing together is not going to work. So we really need to be understanding the whole picture for that person to get it right. We also need to remember that patients and families are so key to this. We have a lot of knowledge that we can share with these families, but sometimes we come in and think that we're the experts and we tell the families what to do. And we don't understand the reality for these families. So we need to remember that while we have expertise to share with them, we don't understand what is important to that family. We don't understand necessarily what works in the reality of their lives. That's really important to be aware of, that we actually need to truly listen to these families and listen to understand, not just listen to kind of tick the box that we've listened, or listened just to respond to them with why they need to do what we're telling them. But we need to actually listen to understand where they're coming from. If you've not heard anything by Rachel Wright, you need to go listen to her. She's got a podcast and a book called The Skies We're Under. And she did a talk recently where she was sharing how many people are involved with her boys' care. So she has a son with additional needs, and she counted up the number of people that she had to speak to about her son, and it was 80 people. So when we give her one more thing to do, it's one more thing on top of so many other things. So we really need to be understanding and getting alongside these families to be able to actually support them and not just give them one more thing to do. We also need to think about the patient themselves. Often when we're working with people that have postural care needs, often they also have communication needs, and so it's easy to rely on the families. And if that's children that we work with, often that is then the parents that we're speaking to. If that's elderly, often that can be a doctor we're speaking to, but we need to remember the patient themselves. And even if they don't have easy communication, that doesn't mean that we shouldn't be communicating with them. We need to be careful not to just kind of talk to them or talk over them, but actually think about how are they sharing how they're feeling about it, how are they sharing their opinions about it. I work with some incredible speech and language therapists, which makes a big difference to my job. And they use pod books. So if you've not heard of pod books, I recommend having a wee look at them. They're an incredible way that people that struggle with communication can find a way to communicate. And if you've not heard of Jonathan Bryan, then go have a wee look at his stuff as well. He wrote a book called I Can Write, where he used his eyes to identify letters to spell what he wanted to say. And he talks about how some of the things that he wanted to say weren't available to him unless he spelt them, because it just wasn't the word that he was looking for. And that must be incredibly frustrating. So even if there's communication difficulties, we need to think about how we are overcoming them to really be including our patients in their own care. And then we need to also think about how effective are we being. I think this links closely with the other blue box on my slides there, where we think about whether we're able to change body shape positively or not. If we believe that body shape is just going to get worse and worse once a deformity happens, then we're not going to be very ambitious, and we're not going to be able to really think about whether being effective, because we're just going to think, oh, well, we're slowing things down, so that's okay. Or we knew that was going to happen, so that is what it is. But actually we need to be much more reflective about our own practice and actually analysing whether what we are doing is effective or not, and if there's anything more that we can be doing to be making a bigger difference to the patient and their family. So the Scottish Postural Care Forum launched the National Postural Care Strategy in June 2021. I was involved with this, but I can't take an awful lot of credit because I only joined the forum in 2021. So there was a lot of other people that did an awful lot of work with that. It's called Your Posture Matters. That's the QR code if you want to have a wee look at it. It's got lots of kind of documents that you can have a look at. I'll quickly run through some of the things that are in it, but I'm not going to spend lots of time on it because the resources are there online for you to have a look at. But 3 ambitions were made, and under those 3 ambitions were 14 recommendations. We also made 6 e-learning modules, and they're hosted on the TURAS learning platform. So anyone can access them, but you do need to create an account on TURAS and be signed in to then be able to access those modules. But that is free for anyone to access, and you don't need to be anyone particular to access it. That is available to everyone. So that's worth having a look at from that point of view as well. So this is the ambitions and recommendations in the forum. So ambition 1 is about everyone at risk being an equal partner in their care, and that's through having a high quality postural care service. So we should always be looking at our services and looking at, can they be improved, can they be higher quality? There's various recommendations under this. I'm not going to take the time to go through them all because you can have a look at that yourself. But some of the things that we're working on in the forum just now include creating a national postural care digital platform and resources. So we've obviously done some of that with our Your Posture Matters strategy documents, with our e-learning modules. And we've also about to launch some new guidance about completing postural care assessments, which I'll come on to talk more about, as that's the work that I've been highly involved in. And we're also in touch with NHS Inform, who are the website for Scotland to direct patients to kind of get self-help information or to signpost them to the right area. So we're liaising with them just now about trying to create a page about postural care on that website. So there's just more resources available for people to learn more and get connected with the right people. So ambition 2 is about it being everyone's business to protect body shape. It's not up to just the physio or just the OT. It's everyone's role that is involved with someone who's at risk of body shape changes to be doing their part to support postural care. There's a few recommendations under this that you can see. The ones in bold are the ones that have kind of got work currently ongoing within the Postural Care Forum. So that includes things like looking at running a postural care awareness day. We are also developing an education video about supported lying and why that's important, which hopefully will be part of the page on NHS Inform, as well as being on any screens that are in any sort of hospitals and health centres and things, to hopefully reach as many people as possible. And then we're also working alongside Glasgow Caledonian University to include postural care education as part of the university course. And that's within a module that is delivered to multiple degrees, so that it's reaching as many different professionals that would be involved in postural care as possible. So that's some of the work that's ongoing, and hopefully you'll hear more about those kind of things in time. And if you're not in Scotland, hopefully that gives you some ideas of what you could be doing in your country as well. Ambition 3 then is looking at removing barriers to accessing the right equipment. We don't want it to be a postcode lottery. We want people to actually be able to access the things that they need. And equipment provision is also part of what the Postural Care Forum is looking at just now, to look at how consistent or not consistent that is just now, what some of the barriers are, and how we move that work forward. So going on to the work that we've been doing about guidance to support postural care assessments. So we did a survey across Scotland, and it showed some quite scary statistics, I think. So these were some of the things that came out of the survey, that the confidence rating in completing body shape assessment was only 5.8 out of 10. Only 35% were very often or always completing a postural care assessment, and 46% were rarely or never completing assessment prior to implementing postural care. And of those surveyed, 88% reported that national guidance would be useful. So from those statistics, we really felt like we needed to be doing something and giving that support out there. So that's where this guidance is coming from. So this is what the guidance includes. So we've split it into 2 stages. Stage 1 is about identifying a need for postural care, and we recommend using the Mansfield checklist. And that's just these questions that you see on the slide there. They're designed to be really simple yes/no questions that anyone can answer, and that's purposely designed so that it doesn't need a clinician with lots of expertise to come out and do this. This could be the patient themselves, this could be a family member, this could be whoever the first contact worker is that's with someone that might have a postural care need, to flag up the fact that there is a postural care need there, to then get them into the right services. And then we move on to stage 2. And stage 2 is looking at further body shape assessment. So once we've identified that there's a need for a postural care assessment, we then need to be completing a much more in-depth assessment to be identifying what needs to be done. So it is required for anyone that's at risk of body shape changes. We need to be doing it as a baseline as soon as possible. And then it needs to be an assessment where we can repeat those measures so we can see what change is happening, to know whether there's improvement or decline, and to know what we need to be putting in place and whether what we're putting in place is effective or not. It needs to include a hands-on clinical assessment, and then all that information needs to inform our clinical decision making about what to be doing. And if we get this right, it will avoid potential harm, as well as maximising function and potential. So this is what we recommend. What we did was bring together all the assessments that were used by the different members of the Postural Care Forum, and looked at what they had in common. Every assessment was different, none of them were exactly the same, but they all had these things in common. So these are our recommendations for what needs to be included within a postural care assessment. It's not an endless list, it is much more of a starting point, that they need to have these, but it's not to say they can't have more than this as well. So the first thing we recommend is a subjective assessment. So this is looking at having a conversation with the patient, with their family, with whoever's closest to them that knows about them, and gathering as much information as possible from that conversation. Then we need to be thinking about the details of positions that are assessed. So we should always start with assessing them lying on their back, where gravity is having the least effect, and understanding what's going on with their body in that position. And then we would go on and assess. So if we were assessing for a seat, for example, we would then go on and assess them in a sitting position, to understand their bodies when they're lying on their back and gravity is not involved, but then to understand what's happening to their bodies when we bring in that bit more of gravity to put them into a sitting position. And that information together needs to feed into what their seating should be. Similarly, if we were looking at standing and how we support them in standing, we would assess them lying on their back first, taking away gravity, understanding what's going on with their body as much as possible, before then looking at what they're like in that standing position. So we then think about within each of these positions that we are assessing, depending on what we're assessing for, we then want to look at body symmetry. And that's across the full body. So we're looking at the pelvis, we're looking at the trunk, we're looking at the head, the arms, the legs, and we're also looking at how weight is distributed from one side of the body to the other. We also need to think about how fixed or flexible these are. And I think we need to be really careful when we're using the word fixed by what we mean by that. So obviously flexible means that if it's not in a symmetrical position, it can be brought back to a symmetrical position fairly easily. When we use the term fixed, we're often saying that when we put our hands on them, on their bodies, and try to bring them back to a symmetrical position, we're not able to. But we need to remember that that's saying we're not able to at that point in time. That's not saying that they'll be stuck like that forever, but it's going to change what you are going to implement from that point of view. If it's flexible and you're able to get it back into a good position, a symmetrical position, compared to if you physically can't get it into that position, then trying to put in place something that will put them back into that position won't have the effect you're looking for, because it'll force their body to compensate elsewhere. But it's not to say we can't have the right forces working on that. It just needs to be a much more gradual approach. So we need to be careful with that term of the word fixed, and just make sure that when we are putting that in our documentation, when we're sharing that with colleagues, that we're understanding what that means. We then need to look at joint range of motion measurements, and this is across the body, hips, knees and ankles, but we also need to remember about the upper body, our shoulders, our elbows, our wrists, as well as our neck, and thinking about, again, how easily those body parts are moved, or how difficult it is for those body parts to move. We also want to think about risk and health checks. So there's things included in this list here: pain, pressure care, skin integrity, respiratory function and vision. And these are things that often come up when we're looking at postural care. They have a big impact on postural care. But again, that's not an endless list. It needs to be individualised to your patient that you're working with, to understand what the risks are for them, and what needs to be taken into consideration. And then once we've gathered all that information, we're then using our clinical reasoning. And that's where we're looking at, what does all this information tell us is going on with the body? What does it tell us is going on with the person? What does it tell us that we actually need to then do to support that person, to enable them to participate as best as possible while preventing those secondary issues? So that then leads us to our action planning, our intervention planning, to work out what we're actually needing to put in place. And obviously that comes alongside our goal setting. So what are we actually trying to achieve within this, and what are we going to do to achieve that? We also need to remember, when we're doing this, to think about how we're going to evaluate if we've been effective or not. So we need to have some way of saying, when we put these interventions in place, we know that this is what it was like beforehand. Now we've put this intervention in place, we know if we've made that improvement or not. So we need to have a way to measure that change, to know that we've been effective, or to know that we've not been effective, and we need to go back and look at things again, or there's been some factors that we've missed that have had an impact. So that's really important to be considering that when we're doing this initial assessment, and when we're planning what our interventions are, to think about how we're going to know that we've been effective. We've also got a wee bit of information specific to seating assessments as well, which is looking at the body dimension measurements, which are sometimes called critical measures, as well as evaluating current seating and the impact on participation, function, alignment and risk. So this is part of what's included in the national guidance that's going to come out, which is just a flowchart to take you through what you do and in what order, really. So the first thing we recommend is completing those modules online, then looking at identifying if there's a need for postural care, and if there is, going on to stage 2 and completing that much more in-depth assessment, putting in your interventions, evaluating the effectiveness, and then that obviously works in a cycle. We can't just go, okay, we've got everything sorted, because bodies change, circumstances change, and different services are going to do that in different ways. That's going to depend what your service looks like, what the challenges are within your service, how you decide to review, when you decide to review, and that needs to be worked out within your service to make sure that you're being as effective as possible from that perspective. So thinking about what assessment that you use, there is information within the national guidance that is hopefully helpful no matter where your service is at, to be able to have something that you can use. So there's obviously that information that I've shared on what should be included in a postural care assessment, and that's to give us some guidance to either allow your service to make their own if they don't already have one. You can use that information to make your own postural care assessment, or if you've already got your own that you have made, then you can check it against the guidance to make sure that it's including all the recommended things. It's also got within the national guidance an example template. So if your service doesn't already have a postural assessment, then it's one that you can kind of pick up and use to kind of get you going. It's not to say that you're stuck using that forever. Please make use of it and adapt it to what works. But it includes all the things that we've recommended within that. We've also got a table of recognised assessments for postural care, and they are brilliant, and that's what it's one of those that I use within my practice at the moment, and they're incredibly useful. But what we recognise with that is that often comes with a commitment from kind of managers to invest time and money to train staff to do those assessments. So that's why we've put in that table for you to look at, and absolutely make use of those assessments that are already out there. we don't want the time and money to be an excuse for you not to be doing postural care assessments as well as possible. So there's different options depending on where your service is at with that. So coming on to think about how clinicians can help protect body shape for children and adults. So in some ways it's really simple. It's through appropriate assessment and intervention, but we need to be making sure that we're actually getting that right. So thinking about what that looks like, we need to be identifying risk factors for body shape change, because actually body shape change is predictable. So the sooner we identify those risk factors, the earlier we can intervene, and the more effective we can be. Preventative care is much kinder, it's much easier, and it also, in terms of thinking about the bigger impact it has, it's going to make it easier for the patients and the families, but also in terms of those thinking about budgets and stuff like that, it's going to save money in the long term if we intervene earlier in a much easier way. It's going to have that benefit as well. So we need to be thinking about intervening early. We need to be baselining early, getting an idea of what is happening in the body, and we need to be assessing regularly. The evidence says that positive or negative change can be seen at 3-month intervals. I don't know how many that are doing postural care assessments are doing them every 3 months for every patient you work with. And I appreciate that that's probably not a reality that you can do, but it's just to be aware of the fact that if changes can be seen as early as 3 months from one assessment to another, how are we deciding when we reassess? And that comes back to thinking about what are those risk factors that we need to be thinking about. And that obviously needs to be considered within your service, and what the realistic ability is within your service to reassess, but it's an important factor to be aware of, that we could be missing an opportunity here to be more effective in our care. So that's something to be thinking about. We also need to think particularly about the postural care over the 24-hour period. It can be easy to get in the habit of being more efficient with one part of postural care than another. But when we're looking at the evidence, for those with movement difficulties, 50% of their time is spent in lying. And if they're unwell, if they're in hospital, that can move to being 100%. So it's a huge amount of time where we can be either making a positive or a negative impact. And so that's a really important part that we need to consider, is that supported lying. And if you've not seen Sarah Clayton's webinar from April, then have a look at that. And if you have seen it, go back and watch it again, because Sarah has a lot of knowledge to share on that. That's really helpful, particularly thinking about supported lying. We also need to be thinking about patient and families. We need to really be listening to them, and actually not just listening, but understanding them. I think often as practitioners, we are good at thinking we've got a role to play in educating them, but we almost leave it there. And actually, when you look at that list on my slide, it's listening, understanding, educating, and supporting. And if we're only doing the one bit, it's kind of us leading it and not doing the 3 bits. It's really around getting alongside those families and appreciating things from their point of view, then we're not getting things right. So we really need to be hearing these families and getting alongside them. And I think with that, because we think we'll do our education and then we've ticked that box, we've supplied the equipment, what's the problem? But life is complex for these families, and often a one-off conversation is not going to cover it. Often that's a continual process as things change in their lives. We need to be having those kind of continual conversations with them and being available for them to support them and understand them and problem solve with them to work out how we can best support. And continue your own CPD. Don't stop learning. Don't stop linking with people that know more about postural care, reading the research, the articles that come out, connecting with people that work in this field too, to understand more of it and the impact that we can have if we get this right. So we then want to think about how we embed postural care within our practice. And that can be challenging because different areas have different kind of things that they count as mandatory, and that can be really difficult to control. But one of the ways that we've found is by linking in with moving and handling. So moving and handling is often mandatory and postural care is often not. And that's unfortunately the reality just now, when a lot of people that are doing moving and handling whether they know it or not, they are also doing postural care. So within Scotland, we have the Scottish Manual Handling Passport Scheme. And what's changed within that is that within almost every section, there's now added a point within this where it talks about postural care being a part of the moving and handling. So the moving and handling hasn't really finished until you've made sure that they're in a good posture to be able to then participate in whatever it is that they're participating, whether that is being comfortable to sleep, whether that is being in a seat where they're able to communicate with their eye gaze device, whatever that is that they are doing, that you've got them in the right posture to do that. And so that can be a good way to embed postural care in practice, is by speaking to the moving and handling trainers that train whatever staff are in your service, or that you kind of work alongside, and making sure that they are doing that as part of moving and handling, that transition as they move and handle doesn't finish until that posture is right. So hopefully that is a helpful way to be thinking about it as well. So hopefully that's been helpful. A few things that hopefully you've taken away from this is that postural care is both supportive and enabling. Positive change can happen in postural care, but there's still lots of work to do in this. Lots of work to improve postural care, and we need to work together to have that impact across various professions, various services, alongside families, to have that impact to really change postural care for the better. Do listen and understand your patients and your families. I've had so many more conversations with patients and families over this past year, and I've learned so much from listening to them and the reality of their lives. So yeah, listen to them and understand what it is that they're saying to you, and work alongside them to problem solve the real life problems that they have, rather than just giving them equipment and expecting them to use it and getting frustrated when they're not, because that is just not as simple as that. There's a lot going on for them. But most families are keen to problem solve with you and keen to be heard. And I think we can often solve the problems that they have if we work together. And hopefully the new guidance that's coming out will be useful for your services in terms of postural care assessment.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Jenny, for joining us and for sharing that. We will continue to keep everyone updated. And as I said at the beginning, if you have any questions, do please share them with us. You can email them to us at admin@a1momentum.com, and we will wait until Jenny's return from maternity leave to ask her the questions, but we will keep you informed along the way. And we hope that you found today extremely helpful. I know that there's lots of great work going on there, and thank you so much, Jenny, for sharing that with us. Thank you.
You're welcome.